everyone, and welcome back to From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea. You are joined by me. My name is Hannah, and you're joined by Itai in Jerusalem.
Hi, nice to be with you again.
Yay. This is an exciting episode, and I'm sure there are quite a few listeners here who are listening to our voices for the very first time, because you know that this episode we are interviewing the wonderful Elica Lebon. And we just wanted to say hi in case this is the first time you're listening and give you maybe just a bit of a background to who we are. So I am Hannah. I'm a family lawyer in Melbourne.
And my name is Itai. I'm a journalist in Jerusalem, and I also work in the interfaith organisation Kids for Peace Jerusalem, where I conduct dialogue between Israeli and Palestinian children about their identity and their hopes for the future.
And this podcast came about just after October 7th, when I, as a Melbourne Jew living in Australia, was feeling very confused about what to believe on the news, on social media, what to think, asking questions like, am I a Zionist? Is Israel a colonialist, imperialist state? And because of my confusion, I reached out to Itai, and we had hours and hours of conversations through texts and on the phone, and we decided to put our conversations out in the world and make a podcast. So if this interests you, we would love for you to go back and have a listen to some of our episodes that are available. The first two episodes are about basically a deep dive into the history of the region from both an Israeli and Jewish and Palestinian perspective.
So we've also had some really amazing guests. Mushon Zeraviv, who speaks about the challenge of empathy for two people in a war that are suffering at an immensely painful period of time in both of our histories. We had Lana Alkalan, who is a peace activist and journalist in East Jerusalem, speaking about her experience living in this holy city and the differences in rights for Palestinians to Jews, but also in a very heartwarming way. And I think Hannah fell in love with Lana during that episode.
I did.
You did,
and
yes.
We still text. We
you
love
still
each
text.
other.
That's great. And then the episode before, episode 6, is with Maoz Inon, who tragically lost both of his parents on October 7th, and since that day has been fighting for peace, fighting against calls for revenge, and is just a truly inspirational human. And I think all of us have something to learn from him. We also have, after this episode with Elica, two incredible podcasters from Unapologetic, The Third Narrative, Amira and Ibrahim, who are both young Palestinians who I'm not going to say too much what's going to happen in that conversation, but I'm sure our fans will appreciate that too. So a lot to look forward to on From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea.
So without further ado, this is the episode that I know many of you have been waiting for. This is our conversation with Elica Lebon. So we are so honoured to have on the podcast today Elica, who's an Iranian attorney, activist and artist who is currently living in Los Angeles in the United States. She has over 152,000 followers on Instagram, and that is how we found her. And now she's sitting opposite me, kind of, on a computer screen via Zoom. Welcome, Elica. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So maybe to start, we can just tell the audience a little bit about who you are, about your background, where you were born, and why you care so much about the current war going on in the Middle East.
So my family are from Iran. I'm Iranian. I was born in London. My family fled Iran after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Obviously, that was kind of the beginning of the really, really, really dark days for Iran that has continued on for the past 45 years. So grew up in London, had this kind of sense of justice in my background, moved to California to be a criminal defense attorney just because of like America being the epicenter of, mass incarceration in all of the world. And just having that, sense of everything that was going on in Iran with wrongful convictions, false accusations, and all of this kind of thing. So the current conflict, obviously the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, it's all deeply connected. And the Islamic Republic, of course, has some involvement in the current conflict. But more broadly, it's kind of understood as a person who's from the Middle East, a person who cares about the Middle East, that, at least from my perspective, stability and peace and unity in the region is really, really important for just like the overall health of the Middle East. So seeing this kind of current climate where there is so much warmongering between people actually doing it, between these two sides, and trying to like stoke the flames and exaggerate the tensions and divide, when actual Middle Eastern people, it's in our best interest to have peace in the region. It's just been so frustrating, and that's kind of been the big thing that I've been working against, I guess.
So as a fellow Middle Eastern person, I'll also add my mother was born in Baghdad in Iraq, so I have a long history in this part of the world, even though I grew up in Australia, and I'm now living in Jerusalem. And I know often there's a lot of discussion about whether people who are not Israeli or Palestinian should have even the right to have opinions on this. And I'll say on this podcast, all our guests so far have been either Israeli or Palestinian. So you're the first guest that's not Israeli and Palestinian. What do you think about that question about who has a right to speak about, this horrific war?
Well, first of all, I would like to state for the record that I am 4% Levantine.
Okay, good
According
to
to my ancestry.com.
Well, then you're one of us.
Exactly.
There we go. We have hummus now together. Yeah.
So
Okay.
no more questions, no notes. Like, let's move on. No, no, but I think at the end of the day, there is so much more to what is in front of our eyes in terms of this war, because even though what we see in front of us is a war, there is so much more. There's so much more broad kind of ideology wars going on, right? And part of those ideology wars deeply, deeply affect the Middle East, particularly Iran, when so much of the root of the ideology wars are coming from the Islamic Republic and allies, right? Or proxies. And so these ideologies that are kind of funneled into Western academic institutions through like Qatari money, Islamic Republic money, that have Westerners kind of supporting these like very, very dangerous ideologies through the door of Israel Palestine, right? Like, oh, we're doing this because we care about this, and therefore we support these heinous ideologies. Then that gives somebody like me the right to step in and say, oh no, you don't, because those ideologies are killing my people. They're killing the Yemeni people. They're killing Lebanese people. They're killing much more people than is just limited to that scope of Israel and Palestine. So when you want to come in and start talking about those things, which is exactly what people are talking about, that's when I'm going to step in.
And just to follow up on that, there's often a debate of how people call themselves. So some people call themselves pro-Israel or Zionist. Some people call themselves pro-Palestine, but then Israelis say no, that's pro-Hamas. Others say if you're calling yourself pro-Israel, you're pro-genocide. There's a lot of labels that are thrown around based on what people have said, and I feel like you're a bit harder to pin down with a one pro this or pro that. But if you had to sort of summarize your worldview, and you don't have to use 2 words, you can use as many words as you like. How would you sort of, what perspective or what are you in favor of, I guess, when you talk about Palestine and Israel?
I mean, it's probably like a really cheesy answer to say that I'm pro people, but I think in order to be pro people, you necessarily have to be what is against what is harmful to a collective group of people. And so because I recognize Hamas as objectively harmful to Israelis and Palestinians, I'm against Hamas. And then when you look at even like the extremists of the right-wing Israeli government, I perceive that as harmful. So I'll be against that too, So I think it is hard to kind of pin down what I'm for, because I think it's more about I'm for the people, and it's more about what am I against. Therefore, in
Yeah.
support of the people.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think people are. I think it's ridiculous for people to wonder that anyway, because people say it about me as well, that they find what I say confusing. I hear that about you as well. They find you really confusing. But I think it's when
I love that.
It's yeah, me too. I also really
I like
love
to
it.
fuck it up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do it on purpose. Like sometimes if I'm like too much one way, I'm like, oh, I think I'm gonna mix it up just to like really piss people off, because I know that they get so annoyed because the human brain just loves to predict, right? Like that's the favorite thing to do. And so they're like, you start going a certain direction. They're like, okay, I've predicted you, I figured you out.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh no, you haven't. So
yes, because we're all so complex, and also we're all learning. Like especially for me, like this has been a massive learning curve for me. So when I learn something, I'm like, okay, this is my new thing that I've learned and I want to show people. And then I learn something else that maybe it doesn't contradict, it's just another truth. And then I say that and they're like, but you just said this. And it's like, well, they're both true. People can't hold
and I think,
two truths.
Exactly. And I think another part of it is just self-awareness. Like if I feel like I'm leaning too much in one direction, like there's this kind of like self-awareness in me that's like, okay, but Elica, are you forgetting? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, don't get so caught up in what you believe here that you neglect all of these other things that are important too, you know? So it's like, it's just that self-awareness check of like, okay, if I'm being too much in my head about one thing, because there's so many things that are so obvious to me, especially with this ideology stuff, that I just want to like scream and shake people. And then, but at times I have to be like, okay, just like step back a little bit and just remember that there's a lot going on in this story. So it's not just about wanting to piss people off, which I do enjoy. It is also about myself and just like, you know, staying aware of myself at all times and making sure that like, am I doing what feels right in this work, right? Like I don't want to start not liking myself if I'm not doing what feels right. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think that's really my guidepost of it's morality is my guidepost, you know, like do I feel good about the things that I'm saying? And if not, then I know that I need to change it.
Oh, I love that. And I want to come back to a lot of what you were just talking about, especially the identity politics stuff. But first, one of the reasons why we really wanted to get your voice on the podcast is because you know a lot about the Iranian regime. You talk a lot about it on your Instagram account, and it's something that I think a lot of our listeners don't know about. I especially didn't know about anything really to do with Iran until I started following you. So if you are comfortable, I'd love to, if you could tell us a bit about Iran and the Iranian regime and how you see it being connected to Hamas.
So I refer to this as kind of like Islamist imperialism. And since you say that your followers don't know, just to be clear, there's a difference between Islamic and Islamist. Islam is just, when you talk about Islam, it's just like ordinary Sunni moderate, Shia moderate, peace-loving, practicing Muslim. And then you have Islamist, which is it's religious fundamentalism. So it's a form of imperialism because it believes in existing by spreading itself. So the Islamic Republic, gosh, I mean, where do you even begin? It is a system, well, its legal system, it's Sharia law, which is a very oppressive system that disproportionately, I guess, punishes women. It has a very strictly enforceable dress code. Women have to be covered in hijab and other areas of their bodies covered. And it's very politically repressive. There's no freedom of speech. You cannot criticize the government. The government it's also very corrupt. So the economic status of the country has fallen into rapid decline. So there's a lot going on, but ultimately what it has led to is protests over the course of the past 45 years. And because protesting, freedom of speech is not permitted in Iran, what you have is a lot of mass executions taking place by lynching because people are protesting their government. So then in September 2022, there was this girl, Masajina Amini. She was a 22-year-old woman, Kurdish Iranian woman, who was killed by the morality police, who essentially beat her because she was improperly wearing her hijab. So that sparked another protest, which kind of turned into a revolution, because we kind of have these many times over the years. So that turned into like this widespread revolution. And then you had protests erupting all around Iran, and just millions of people protesting the Islamic Republic, trying to get the Islamic Republic out. So that's when you started to see this like massive increase in executions happening all across Iran, lashings, torture, rape, shootings. They have sentenced somebody to have his eyes taken out. It's just very grotesque, like medieval form of punishment. So now the Islamic Republic has a number of proxies, and those proxies are, well, there's a few of them, but the three main proxies are Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, like the three H's. And so in the case of Israel and Palestine, the Islamic Republic's sworn enemy, of course, is Israel. So it believes in not a two-state solution, a one-state solution, which is all Palestine and no Israel, no Jews. So in furtherance of that, it has been funding and supporting Hamas since 1987 in order to kind of support Hamas's plans to remove the Zionist project, whatever you want to interpret that as.
I want to ask you about what you say to people who say, we don't want to talk about the links to Iran right now. What Hamas are doing are fighting for Palestinian freedom and autonomy and resistance, and we need to be supporting them right now because we care about the Palestinian people. What do you say to that?
No, first of all, you can't support terrorists under any context. They are not freedom fighters, and they're not fighting for Palestinian liberation. I mean, they are in the context of removing Israel as a state, if you see that as Palestinian liberation, but you could say that about anything. You could say that, okay, well, I think that the liberation of Iran means getting rid of every other country in the Middle East. Like, that's not a fair liberation goal, right? It's another form of imperialism or colonialism. So Hamas has been very clear about its goal, which is essentially to return to the caliphate, which was before the British Mandate. And it's been very clear, even in its quote unquote updated charter from 2017, that even where it said it would accept the 1967 borders, they went on to say, which is people forget, they went on to say that they will not end their attack on the Zionist project until the Zionist project is gone. They aren't hiding the fact that their goal is to remove Israel as a state completely. So no, I cannot support, no, you cannot, nobody can support a terrorist group that intends for an entire nation to be wiped out.
I guess I want to ask you now about Israel. So Israel since 1967 has been, occupying Gaza and the West Bank. Before that time, they were part of Jordan and Egypt, and that occupation obviously hurt a lot of Palestinians. And I can see in Jerusalem the walls, the checkpoints, the permits, the way it affects daily life for Palestinians. Is horrific. And I know I, as a Jew in Jerusalem, have a lot more rights than my Palestinian friends that might live in Kufr Aqab or a place like that, because I don't need to go through a wall to get to work. I don't need to wait at a checkpoint which may be closed. I have access to better schools, better healthcare, all of those sorts of things. What do you say about the occupation, Israel's decision to continue it, and its role in our current situation?
This is one of those, again, like everything is such a it's not a black and white situation, because on one hand you say, well, this history of terrorism, what are we supposed to do? Just have no security, no checks. And then on the other side, that you have a bunch of people who are not terrorists, they're just ordinary Palestinians, women and children, that have to suffer the experience of that intense kind of scrutiny and living in that kind of system, and they're kind of having to carry the weight of that experience that has nothing to do with them, quite frankly. And so it's really difficult to kind of, from both perspectives, it's really hard to say, like, what is the solution, right? Do we just remove the entire thing completely and come up with some agreement? But then who do you make the agreement with, right? And who's even amenable to an agreement? Is Netanyahu amenable to an agreement? Like, is this cabinet amenable to an agreement?
Not at the moment, no.
And that's why I call this a war of extremists, or just like a war of extremes, because you have, and I'm not making moral equivalencies, but you have the extreme of two ideologies that are warring against each other and can't find a common ground, and just finding solutions in that is, I don't know, it's really difficult. I think that, of course, something has to change in the West Bank, because it's just not sustainable, and it's been going on for too long. I just don't know. I don't know how. I don't know what it would look like. I know that we need better leadership on both sides.
Elica, I want to ask you a question that I've asked every other guest that we've had on, and it's my favorite question to ask. Why do you think you are the way you are and you see this war as you do, when there are so many other ways? Like, you know, people have opinions left, right, and center. Why do you think what you do?
So I came from kind of like the opposite perspective as you. I'm from London, and London is very, very, very kind of pro-Palestine crowd. And I was very, very pro-Palestine for about 10 years. I mean, aggressively pro-Palestine. I didn't want to hear the other side at all. I was not interested. I'd made up my mind. And then I don't know how it happened. I don't know. I think it was just like through TikTok or Instagram. I kind of was just following some Jewish accounts who kind of started to speak about Israel and things like that. And I was like, oh, wait, there's another perspective to this. It was like I accidentally was like learning, you know, I wasn't trying. And then as I was learning and kind of like unlearning a lot of the like very, very black and white beliefs that I had held, I mean, I was really, really shocked. I was shocked that it was possible for me to have such a strong, abiding conviction in just a very black and white perspective, despite so much nuanced information being available that I just never considered. So I think just the knowledge, so that made me kind of see things from a much more holistic perspective. Then I was like, okay, wait, there's way more to this story. But also just knowing where I came from, where I was like, okay, that's not good. It is not just like you said, right? Like, it's just so bad to just kind of have this one-sided perspective and think that everything's right. I think that's why I am the way that I am, and why my whole thing is about nuance, because it actually doesn't matter what I think. Do you know what I mean? It really doesn't matter what I think. Even if I tell you like I'm 100% pro-Palestine, 100% pro-Israel, I'm just hiding it. Who cares? As long as I'm making people think and challenge what they believe and see things in a more nuanced way, because where I came from, that was a problem, and I need to make sure that other people aren't doing that too.
I love that. Oh, God, I can't tell you how much I love that. Okay, I want to ask you now about the ICJ case. I know you've spoken a lot about it on your Instagram account, and I know there are quite a few of our listeners who might know a little bit about it as well. But I wanted to just ask you on this podcast a little bit about what you know about the ICJ case and what you think about South Africa bringing this case against Israel for genocide.
Yeah, so much of this stuff is, so much of the law in general, but especially in this case, is very political, because from my understanding, you know, South Africa has a long history of supporting Palestine because it kind of sees similarities with its own experience of apartheid. And so this is kind of just like an extension of South Africa's support for Palestine. So it's brought this petition against Israel at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, under the Genocide Convention, which was established after World War II, claiming that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinian people. So I kind of spoke about this a little bit on Instagram, which I did get a lot of backlash for, just literally just saying the facts. But the main point of proving the charge of genocide is intent, which is that you have to have intent to destroy an ethnic group or nation, either in whole or in part. So obviously we know this decision isn't coming down right away. We can talk about the interim decision, but we know that the actual decision is going to take possibly years. But I think what people need to understand first off is that this isn't going to be a case where anyone's going to be deciding that this entire war is a genocide or that it's not a genocide, because we know that Israel is at least in part, we don't know how much right now, at least in part has the intention to defend itself, right? And Hamas still has the hostages. So it couldn't be the case that any court finds the entire war to be just for the basis, just with the intent of eradicating the Palestinian people, because we know that there's at least some intent for self-defense. So what is being analyzed is rather whether there are some genocidal acts. There are some specific incidences that are considered genocidal, right? And there's other things as well under the Genocide Convention. Like there's things like failure to prevent a genocide by not providing enough humanitarian aid or things like that. But these all bring up really interesting questions, because then we ask the question, okay, so when there's a war, who has the responsibility to provide humanitarian aid? Is it the person that is engaging in the war, that is committing the war, that who started the war? And if that's the case, does that apply to everybody? Like these things are like, they're very probative. You know, they expand on issues that are much broader than just Israel and Palestine. Like this is setting major precedent.
I just want to share my experience watching the case, and I have zero experience in law, but as an Israeli, you know, this is the 75th year of Israel's existence, and it was meant to be a year of celebration. And for the first 9 months of this year, we've been fighting here over this judicial reform, which basically stopped on October 7th. And then since then, there's this war with Hamas. And then I watched 6 hours of this trial, and for the first 3 hours, I hear South Africa having all the ministers of my government quote after quote of horrific statements about Palestinians, saying there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, calling for a second Nakba, and then statements from Israeli soldiers as well that, you know, again, sort of chanting and singing and celebrating Palestinian destruction. And then I watched the second 3 hours, and then it's full of statements from Hamas calling for destruction of Israel, killing of Jews, you know, etc. And I just watched this again, not as a lawyer, but just as a human being, and feel like immense sadness that these two people that live here, that we actually have so much in common. And here the whole world gets to see us at our worst. They get to hear all of the violent and racist statements from Israelis, and then the next day they hear all the violent and racist statements from Hamas. And I know some people watch this and they go, well, let's just get rid of nation states. Like maybe nation states are the problem here. I want to know your thoughts on that question. Like, is what's dividing us the existence of an Israeli nation state and a Palestinian nation state that's, you know, coming to be born, or is it something deeper than that? And did you also have that feeling maybe when you watched the trial as well?
This is why I say that people need to be more mad at their leaders, because if you really have a genuine claim of self-defense here, you don't think that those people making those statements is going to make people have questions? Like, you don't think people who are watching this, people don't know, or they're not on the ground, they're not in Israel and Palestine, they don't know what's going on, they just hear stuff on the news, and they hear these like extremists making comments like this, like, oh, they all deserve whatever they say, right? You don't think people in the international court, like, I mean, actual people, right, the court of public opinion, are going to be like, we have questions about that, right? So I don't think it's realistic to expect that people are not going to think that there's some ulterior motive here when you have people saying things like this. Like, you need better leadership than people that are going to be so irresponsible and reckless than to make people think that it's a genocide, whether it is or not. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you get better leadership? You know, I constantly say we desperately need new elections in Israel and new elections in Palestine. And then people often say to me, but, you know, looking at the current reality, most Israelis will see Hamas on one side and vote for, you know, maybe not Netanyahu, but another sort of right-wing government.
Mm-hmm.
And the Palestinians will see, you know, the current, you know, Smotrich and Ben Gvir and whatever as ministers. And so they'll vote also for something very extreme. So how do you, when, you know, we vote here based on what we see on the other side, and when we see,
it's reactionary.
When we see, Exactly. And so when we see sort of peace on the other side, we're more likely to vote for peace on our side. But when we see what we consider not a partner for peace on the other side, then we vote for very extreme politics. So how do you change that? How do you sort of tell people don't vote for the party that's calling for revenge or distraction?
Mm.
Vote for the party that's compromised when you don't see on the other side a party that wants that.
Yeah, and you can't blame people for feeling that way. But I think I can answer that with going back to your other question as well about nation states. If you think even before the state of Israel existed, they were fighting each other on the land for many, many years. So I don't think that nation states are the problem. What I think is the problem is ideology. It is these competing ideologies of extremes, right? So, for example, we know that Zionism is a political spectrum. You can have
Yeah.
extremist Zionism, right? And that extremist Zionism is the belief that, this entire land is Israel, and that's the key goal. And then you have the extremism on the other side, which is that the entire land is Palestine. And being stuck in this ideology, this immovable, rigid ideology that no, this entire land has to be Palestine from one extreme to no, this entire land has to be Israel to the other extreme, is why you have wars. Because, and I'm not talking about even between nation states, just on the ground, right? When you have like you had these militia groups attacking each other for so many years because they could not reconcile these ideologies against each other. But when you have the ideology that, okay, we're sharing this land either as one state, right, or two states, then you don't need to live in this constant state of warring one extreme against the other that is trying to impose its ideology across the entire nation, and really to the benefit of a minority of extremists that even support that. Because most people don't want to live that way. Most people don't want to keep fighting and dying over land. They just all want to be able to live in one place in peace. So I don't think nation states are the problem. I think that ideology is the problem. And this actually brings me perfectly to why I do what I do with such aggression and fervor, because ideology is at the root of this. And you guys in the world with your ideology are causing this to be even worse. And so that's why if we rein that in and fix the problem with the ideology, we can absolutely fix the problem on the ground.
Yes. And when you say ideologies, do you mean like the pro-Palestinian ideology, or do you mean like the very Zionist ideology? Like, who are you talking about when you talk about we need to focus on these ideologies?
So I feel what I found with some of the Israeli accounts that I follow that are more on the pro-Israeli side is that it feels like what they're doing more is resisting the narratives against them. Like, so when I speak to my Jewish friends or Israeli friends, they are a lot more critical of Israel when I speak to them than what they post online.
It's our government and it's done in our name. Yeah.
It's done, exactly. So they, like, my Israeli and Jewish friends are always like, oh, we hate Netanyahu, we fucking hate this guy, da da da. But on the internet, they're like, well, wait, because I think they feel like they're always being attacked. So it seems like they're always kind of just like responding to being attacked. But I didn't get the memo, okay? That's why I got cancelled when I put that ICJ post up, because I was like, wait, guys, I thought we all knew that we didn't like this government. And then people were getting like defensive in public. And I was like, oh, so you're just like not telling people that in public because, I don't know, I guess you feel defensive because Israel's always being criticized.
Yeah, there's a lot of Jews, will never criticize the Israeli government publicly, but in our living rooms, we'll go to town. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And see, I didn't get the memo. That's what I'm saying, because I guess like I get it that like you're always like feeling like the world is attacking Israel. So a natural position that an Israeli person is going to take for their own like protection is that, okay, I'm with you and I'm attacking them too. We're together. Yeah. Or it's going to be like, no, you're completely wrong. Here's my total 100% defense because you can't attack me. So it feels like both of those are like self-protection in a way. So I get like why people do that.
Yeah, but I tell you what was really interesting. When Israel stood up and said, look, it's not genocide, but we are looking into incitement and the comments made by Netanyahu and other ministers were really terrible, and we they could be incitement. I had a lot of respect for what they did there, because if you just defend and you don't accept any accountability, it's really hard to take you seriously. So a lot of people I see on the internet are doing that. They're like, they won't say anything bad about Israel, only say, oh my God, you're attacking me, and also look at what the other side is. But what Israel did, and after that, I was like, wow, that was a really, really good defense, because they can see what those ministers are saying are fucked. It's just horrible. And to say we are taking this seriously, it is not genocide, but we are taking this seriously. It could be incitement. It could be like akin to what Trump did. That makes me have so much more respect for them. And when I see people doing it on the internet, I have way more respect for people who say we recognize our part in it. And it doesn't mean that we're the only people here and that there is another side doing terrible things as well. But both sides are to blame here. And I care a lot when Jews can say that, because it shows me that they are actually looking at this semi-objectively, or as objectively as you can.
And I think, like, even if a country has the right to defend itself, which it does under international law, it doesn't mean that you can then do whatever you want, right? It doesn't mean that, like, and this is what, like, some of the people in my comments were like, if Israel wanted to commit a genocide, it would have nuked Gaza the next day. And it's like, well, not necessarily, because no one's that fucking stupid. Like, first of all, you're not going to nuke Gaza when your hostages are still there. And second of all, it's just, that's obvious genocide. So no one who wants to commit a genocide is going to be so obvious. I'm not saying that it's a genocide. I'm just saying, like, that's just such a dumb comment, because no one does that. So I think so. And this is what people don't understand about multiple things being true. So, okay, so you do have the right to defend yourself, right? But in your pursuit of self-defense, does that mean you can just go in and start just... Like, no, of course. So there has to be a limit to the self-defense. Like, that's the question that's being asked. Like, what is the limit to your self-defense? And people on one side don't want to have questions about the limit. They just want to say blank check, self-defense. It doesn't matter who. And then the other side wants to say there's no right to self-defense. You can't do anything to get your hostages back. Everything that happens to you is deserved because you're colonizing, occupying, whatever. So it's really difficult to have conversations with people who see that as those extremes. And it's funny because that video is probably the one video that pissed everyone off equally. Like, when the comments first started coming through, they were like, you're obviously so biased that you would say this. And I would check each account. It would be like Palestine, Israel, Palestine, Israel. I'm like, which one am I biased against? But they didn't like that, because I was suggesting that maybe the entire thing isn't a genocide, but maybe some of it could be a genocide. And nobody wants to accept that, because one side wants the entire thing to be a genocide and the other thing wants zero genocide, just blanket self-defense. It's just such an unrealistic, like, it's just like so out of touch with reality, you know?
That's like the name of our podcast, From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea. So the Yarra River is a river just right like a kilometre away from me in Melbourne. And we loved it because everyone from both sides hates it, which is why I love it. So the Jews say, like, it's a genocidal call, and the Palestinians say, you're appropriating our song. And I see both sides of it, and I'm like, great, I love it. I love that everyone thinks it's about them, and really it's about like peace. That's the whole podcast. So
I love it.
Great.
I love it. Yeah, I love that. I did not come to the middle by following accounts that are in the middle. I came to the middle by following pro-Israel and pro-Palestine accounts. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I needed to follow, because like when something's here, you can't get it to the middle by just saying stuff here. You have to go here to get, like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I also think there's just a lack of in the middle, like people like standing together, that's new. Like, I think there are not many people in the middle showing middle things, because it's really hard to get that message across.
And also the middle doesn't work on social media.
Yeah.
The middle gets no likes, it gets no shares.
Yeah, it doesn't work on social. Yeah, that's why I don't like. Yeah, that's why, like, it's like, I know I'm like, you guys think I'm like super popular, but also just compared to the people that will do like extremist stuff, they'll have like millions of followers, you know?
Yes, for sure.
But
Montaz Aziza, you know, yeah.
exactly,
17
yeah.
million, yeah.
Correct. But like accounts like Standing Together, like, and I love that account just because like we three know more like holistically, those accounts make sense to us. But accounts like Standing Together also are going to be accounts that the pro-Israel and pro-Palestine don't like too much. But that's
Definitely.
because they
They're
don't understand. Yeah, they're very hated, and it drives me crazy. I'm like, how can you hate them? But that's because they don't understand. They're like, why would you want to unify when these are the facts? It's like, but those are not the facts. Those are what you think are the facts. And that's why I feel like when you have these accounts that are like super pro-Israel, super pro-Palestine, I'm like, I get it, because in order to make people understand, you have to share the like one-sided facts, as long as people are watching both sides. But people only watch one side. That's why they don't know the other side. But I thought that's why I'm like, I'm so happy that I follow both. Like, I'll literally just be like, I'll just like have this thought that's like super like pro whatever, like super pro Israel thought or something, and then I'll just watch like 15 stories of like Gaza, 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 Gaza. I'm like, oh my God, no, like, you know, it's so good. I don't know why anyone would not do that.
It's just too painful to look at the other side.
It is. Yeah. You then have to admit that you're wrong, and people don't like to do that.
Exactly.
That's why I was so pro-Palestine for so long, is because everything that I read was facts. It was just half the story. And that's what makes people so abiding in their conviction, because it's like, but I researched everything and it was fact. It's like, yes, but it's just half the story. You don't know the other facts, you know?
Yeah, that was my whole childhood growing up, only learning one side of the story, which is why I was like, I feel like I say to Itai all the time. I was like, I was brainwashed, and Itai was like, you're not brainwashed. You just learned half of the story. That's not being brainwashed. It's
exactly.
Just you only know one side of the story.
You were half-washed.
I was half-washed. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's a good way to frame it. Like there are some half-washers out there.
Yeah.
You know, there's some half-washer accounts, which is like, you know, okay, because it's like not lying, but you should half wash yourself in the other direction to get the balance.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what we should get people to do.
Yes.
There's a tour company in Jerusalem called Mejdi Tours. It's led by Aziz Abu Sara, and they do dual narrative tours. So they take you to all of the contested places in Jerusalem with an Israeli and a Palestinian guide, and they literally stand at the same spot and they say, I see this wall, you know, for security. I see this wall as occupation. I see this is my holy place, this is my holy place. And like, I wish more people that did tourism had an Israeli and Palestinian guide together, because again, the guides of one or the other tell the truth, but when you see it both together, it's such a richer experience. And I think that's Jerusalem.
Yeah. And, you know, I think also just like this also all goes back to like why ideology is such a problem, because so many people, like, for example, people that hate Israel, like Western people who hate Israel and Israelis and Jews, you know, they have this narrative that colonizer, like white supremacists or whatever, right? If they didn't have that ideology, and if that narrative didn't have to constantly be corrected, you wouldn't even, like, nobody would have to focus on that. You could literally just focus on the actual problems. Like, you could focus on the occupation. You wouldn't need to worry about having to always correct a narrative that's happening in the background. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, these people are literally taking away from being able to focus on the problems that Palestinians are experiencing, because you're constantly introducing these other extremist narratives that we constantly have to correct. So that's another thing that's like so frustrating. Like, you want to get people to, you want to draw attention to like the occupation and their experiences and everything that's happening there, but when people just barely even, you know, their ideology is so warped, you're just having to unwarp their ideology, and it distracts from the focus.
And I want to now take it out of like, you know, a bigger ideology of like countries and peoples, and bring it back to person identity politics, because I see this playing out in a huge way in this war. Like, people aren't even like, some people who don't even have any idea about what is happening have a say in this, because it is people reacting on their personal identities. So I want to tell you about a theory I have, which is somewhat connected to this. Have you heard of the truth versus harmony spectrum?
No, but that sounds interesting.
Okay, it's my favorite thing at the moment to talk about. And I heard it on another Australian podcast called The Imperfects. There's a psychologist who comes on the podcast sometimes and answers people's questions. And this particular episode was talking about the spectrum of truth and harmony, and people sit somewhere in between. Truth, which is people who are constantly saying their truth, being their most authentic self, saying exactly how they feel, saying exactly what they think, and not being afraid to say it. And then on the other side of the spectrum is harmony, which is, maybe not saying exactly how you feel, but trying to keep the peace and being harmonious. And the whole episode, I listened to it, and the point of the episode was that she said, this psychologist, Dr. M, that most people sit on the harmony side of the spectrum, and people don't often say what they think, and eventually it builds up as resentment, and either you never really feel yourself, or it blows up in another way. So the whole time I was listening to this episode, I was kind of like, whoa, this episode is not directed at me. I think I sit way closer to the truth side of the spectrum, because I am constantly trying to be my most authentic self. I definitely choose truth over harmony 7 out of 10 times. And that's because one of the most important things to me is to feel and be my most authentic self wherever I am and whoever I'm speaking to. That's just one of my core values. And often that comes at the cost of external harmony. I know that a lot of people don't like me. And I know they don't like me, and I'm okay with that, because I am so comfortable in my own skin, and I feel the best when I feel the most authentic to myself. And I think it would be a problem if I had no friends. If I was really authentic and had no friends, that would be an issue. But I don't. I have such strong friendships I have the best friends I love so much, and who, I have a really good community around me. I love my family so much, and we have really strong relationships. But I do have people who just don't like me, and that's okay. But I think when we're talking about this topic, I feel like I'm being constantly pulled between, do I stand with my truth here, or do I try and keep the harmony? So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I see this spectrum playing out on this topic. I see it playing out on the internet. I see so many people who usually sit in harmony speaking up now because I can't sit in this harmony anymore. I need to speak my truth. And also the opposite, people who usually speak the truth think, oh God, this is not helping anyone who wants to say anything, just says the truth, and it's actually not causing harmony. So I want to ask you what you think about this spectrum and where you see yourself on the spectrum.
Can I just say, just before you answer, I just want to say that unlike Hannah, I see myself very much on the harmony side of the spectrum, which is probably why I'm a dialogue facilitator. And I have a lot of friends that have very, very different political views than me, and I really try and respect them, even though they go against a lot of my beliefs, and I don't speak to them in a judgmental way, because I want to be a bridge builder. And I know sometimes Hannah might criticize me for that, saying, why didn't you attack that person? He's, I don't know, homophobic and you're not, so you should call that out, and I'm like, but I want to have that person in my life, and hopefully through their experience of me help them see another way, hear different perspectives, etc., rather than just calling them homophobic or whatever ideology it is that I don't hold. And so I think Hannah and I think we've had this conversation before on kind of different ends of the truth harmony spectrum, because I think we both see different ways to affect change. Me with a harmony approach, Hannah with a truth approach. So I guess now that you know where we are, we want to know where you are.
Yeah. So I will say that I think what I'm doing is the exception to the rule, which is that I'm using truth to get to harmony. And the reason that I say that is because under ordinary circumstances, when you talk about this polarity between truth and harmony, it's under the circumstances that truth may in some way jeopardize harmony, right? Because this isn't a truth that people are really wanting to hear, or it's causing too much divide and too much debate. And it's causing people to fall out with each other. But here's the thing, when you have a situation where the truth is so distorted and people's views, people's lack of harmony relies on so much untruth already. The only way that you can get to harmony is not by not saying anything. It's not by being peaceful. It's not by being harmonious. It is by actively saying the truth and jeopardizing your inner harmony, right? Because people are going to abuse you for that. But in order to get to the collective harmony, because when you have both sides who just believe flat out completely wrong things about the other side, you have to keep telling the truth about, you know, the other side to the other side, so that they understand this person is not your enemy. And once they understand, okay, wait, this person is not my enemy, that's how you get to harmony between those two groups, okay? And maybe you got burned on the way for telling that truth, but this is actually a case where truth is necessary to get to harmony. So I think in this case specifically, when the literal core of the conflict, the core of the divide is untruth, this is the exception where you need the truth to get to the harmony.
Yeah. Elica, I want to just say one thing quickly, because you posted something that changed my life. You posted a question asking your followers, why do people find it so hard to change their minds? Or why do people find it so hard to take in new information? And it's something I've been thinking about heaps. And you posted a quote that was, wise people have strong views held weakly.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, I love it so much. It is like now this quote that I am constantly thinking in my head. Even when I think something really, really strongly, I will hold it weakly in case other information comes. And who knows where I'll 100%. Change my mind to from now until tomorrow. And yeah, 100%. I just wanted to thank you in person, because that has really made a huge effect on me.
Oh my God, thank you. No, I thought that was a great quote. It's funny because I think I was thinking about that quote myself today as well, because it's this perfect balance between the strong opinions part is that you have an investment in a cause that means something to you, right? And then the weakly held part is that you know that you've been wrong before and you could be wrong again, and there's probably a lot more to this story than you think. So it's just like that amazing balance between I get to be passionate about something that I believe in, but also vulnerable and amenable to the fact that what I believe in or what I understand about this might not be exactly as I see it. So it gives you that perfect sweet spot to be who you are and advocate for what you advocate for, whilst also being amenable to more information that can actually make you a better advocate, a better humanitarian. Because look at me, if we had just stuck to like one side of the story, sure, we would have been great advocates for that side. But think of how many people I would have hurt if I never decided to see the other side of it, right? So it's just like, why do I want to be that person? I don't want to be that person that's like so one-sided that I end up hurting so many other people. And granted, maybe many people hate us because we aren't one-sided enough, but at least we're not sitting here hurting people with this black and white perspective all the time. At least we have the intention and the good faith intention to be there for as many people as we can, even though we might and probably do accidentally hurt people along the way. So,
but never with intent, because we're just always learning. That's the way I see it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And we have to commit to always learning. And that's one of the ways that you commit to always learning, which is strong opinions weakly held, because I was wrong before, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'll be wrong again. I could be wrong about this, you know.
Exactly. Yes.
I think that perfectly sums up the whole purpose of From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea. So yeah, on behalf of Hannah and I, we'd really like to thank you for giving us your time. We know you're such a busy person, and just opening your heart to us for this conversation, and we hope it's meaningful for all our listeners. If our listeners do want to give us any feedback, they can find us on Instagram at From the Yarra, or they can also email us at fromtheyarra@gmail.com.
And they can also find Elica.
Yes, at Elica Le Bon.
Amazing, at Elica Le Bon. Thank you so much again, Elica, and thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.